Good evening, States Rights Radio. Tonight we're bringing you a special segment which is entitled Restoring the Constitution with Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. Tonight's episode, State Dependency, Our New Norm for the American Republic. So stay tuned for that, and I'll be right back. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with a new segment entitled Restoring the Constitution with States Rights Radio of Federico Lines and Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. Tonight's episode, State Dependency, Our New Norm for the American Republic. Seth, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. For our listeners here, Seth and I, we used to work together, and we kind of share the same idea of constitution-wise and constitutional, more constitutionalist than Republican or Democrat, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of think we've got to throw away the party system, because this tribalism is really killing us, and that's what's kind of destroyed the Constitution.
Correct. And, I guilty as charged, as you probably are too.
Yeah.
We were once Republican and once, we did vote for W. Bush and all that, but nowadays we kind of we're kind of like nonpartisan. And I mean, if Democrats were going back to the Bourbon Democrats of Grover Cleveland, I vote for Grover Cleveland.
Yes.
And if the era of keep cool with Coolidge, we definitely vote for a Coolidge Republican, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just gonna, add on to that. I think where we are now, with just the dependency that every state is dependent on the federal government. I think the American people are dependent on the government. We really need to get back to personal responsibility and accountability, and that really needs to start locally. And that's, on the topic of the show tonight, just on states' rights, we need to get back to that. And I think people need to focus a lot more on local government and trying to get people elected there who will stand up to the federal government.
You're right there, and I remember, in Montana, rest in peace, Conrad Burns, former senator of Montana. His slogan for re-election was "Delivering for Montana." And I remember one conservative guy out there said, "What does that? When you read that, delivering for Montana, what does that mean?" It means it brings home the pork from the federal government. So pork from money from other states, from Florida, from Virginia, Illinois, goes into Montana, into the cattle, into their industry, and that's not what this republic was established. And that's at fault also with the unprincipled 17th Amendment. We'll talk about that in a short while. But we've ever since I did mention to Seth. Calvin Coolidge in 1927, when the Mississippi River flooded, Calvin Coolidge didn't partake in showing his dependency onto the people. He let his own state do it. They have a legislature, they have a governor, they have a judicial system. They need to fix it. Why should it be the federal government? So this delivering for your home state is so unconstitutional beyond means. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. I look at it at the personal level. The more we rely on the federal government, the worse the problems are going to get. The more poor people there are going to be. The more, people are not going to be recovering from disasters, because people need to take responsibility over their lives, even if it's a natural disaster, which is beyond an individual's control. If the person isn't rebuilding what they lost, it becomes much harder to really rebuild what you lost. It just creates a dependency and an entitlement that destroys nations.
Yeah, and I would say the biggest one out there that really showed that dependency was Katrina in 2005. Even Andrew or Hugo, Andrew, Florida, Hugo, Indiana, even California for that matter, that with their wildfires, that also brings. But we actually saw a big dependency in Louisiana, not much in Mississippi, but in Louisiana, where, it was at fault of the federal government with their United States levies. So it was the United States federal government that created that mayhem and then created the mayhem afterwards. But we saw the people crying for Bush to come out, and then you see that image of Bush on Air Force One. So that's where we really saw the dependency.
Yeah, and as you speak of that, it kind of reminds me of what's happening in Ohio as well. With the train derailment, and just how far, the Republicans who, they claim to be the party of liberty, of limited government. But with Ohio, the big news was Joe Biden didn't show up. Pete Buttigieg, it took him a couple weeks. It took him a month to show up. And then Donald Trump showed up. And they act as if somehow the president were to show up, all the problems are going to be fixed. Well, that's antithetical to everything you state you believe in. It used to be that "I'm from the government and I'm here to help" are the scariest words in the English language. Not the case anymore with the Republicans.
No, and then when Trump arrived to the Ohio derailment situation, they asked him, "What would you do if this, after this happened?" And his response was, "Well, I would have released FEMA sooner." I mean, that's what Calvin Coolidge would never have done. That's what Grover Cleveland, which you wrote a very great article, "Where Are the Grover Clevelands?" That's what Grover Cleveland wouldn't have done, or even Calvin Coolidge. So and then one thing also I want to bring up into discussion, Seth, is when Donald Trump went down to Texas, I think after, I forgot which hurricane, 2017, and he started throwing paper towels and all that, and yet when Puerto Rico got hit with a hurricane, he didn't bother to go there. Puerto Rico has much more of a federal protection than the sovereign state of Texas. There you see that screw up that both parties have become.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, we've just lost our idea of proper authority, proper role of government. The federal government, I think even state and local government, is supposed to be very, very limited. It has a very small role in our lives. We should not even feel them. But we've become so dependent, so entitled, and now is the time for people like us to start talking about how do we get back to the independent spirit that founded this country.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. And, I've really, seen that. How do we need to get people riled up? You have the Convention of States people saying that we need to unite with a Constitutional Convention. Well, even the Constitutional Convention in 1787 didn't help us at all. That we have the problems that we have now because of those Federalists in Massachusetts and New York. So imagine that if we do have a Constitutional Convention, who would be the troublemaker states? California? New York? We don't need that.
Yeah. And I just want to throw out there this thought on the Constitutional Convention. What is being said is that the Constitution has failed us. When people say we need a Constitutional Convention, the Constitution hasn't failed us. It's the politicians not following the Constitution. Mm-hmm. So, if we have a Constitutional Convention, let's even say that we strengthen the Constitution and it actually gets better. Well, nothing's going to change because you still send the same politicians to Washington, the same politicians to your state capitals. They're not going to follow the new Constitution. So, it's not the Constitution. It's the politicians. It's the bureaucrats. It's the rise of bureaucracies that shouldn't exist.
You're right. What they're proposing is reform. And reform what? You can't reform something that is already broken. You need to repeal it to fix it. And, they're looking for the easy way out, these Convention of States people and these people that think that the Constitution has failed us. The Constitution hasn't failed us. It's the politicians, both on the conservative side and the liberal side. Or, and you're absolutely right, but I still, my point is that we don't need to reform it. Because reform does, it's fine if you're an alcoholic. An alcoholic can be reformed, and that's great. But when it's something so important like the Constitution, you can't reform it because, they want to create a balanced budget. Well, that's fine and dandy, but they have already in the Constitution, we already have one that they can spend whatever they want. They can tax whatever they spend. So this balanced budget doesn't really work. And I want to throw one more. I know that, you were a big fan of Dr. Paul, and I was too, and Rand Paul. But I just want to throw this discussion. When Ron Paul or Rand Paul start yapping about, and start talking about audit the Fed or abolish the Fed, that's also great. Hey, I abolish the IRS. That's all political talk because, you abolish the IRS, the Congress will, in a matter of days, will create a new Internal Revenue Service with another name. So we gotta get rid, and we gotta really get rid of the amendment process is so beautiful because we can get rid and add new amendments, and we need to get rid of that 16th Amendment.
Yes, yeah, and the 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment, both from the same year, 1913. They need to get rid of, that, and I looked at the 16th Amendment as kind of the amendment that really killed the Constitution, because it was the first amendment that established rights of government. And governments don't have rights. They have authorities, and it should be a limited authority in the American Constitution. And they have obligations, and those obligations are to protect our rights, not to give us free stuff. And the 16th Amendment really perverted everything that the Constitution was about.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I call it, in my upcoming second book, I call it the Sanctioned Robbery Amendment, because that's what it is. It's sanctioned robbery. Because just to throw a little bit of a tidbit for my upcoming book, Seth, that the Congress passed a law to tax stock dividends, and a type of stock dividends. But then the Supreme Court in 1919 said, whoa, wait a minute, taxing stock dividends it's unconstitutional because it's not taxable income. This is where I agree. One of the few agreements I agree with Justice Brandeis, Louis Brandeis, a very progressive jurist on the Supreme Court. But he is right in saying that, the language of the Sixth Amendment says where whatever source derived Congress can tax. Well, this is a source. It's taxable income. So if the Supreme Court says that it's not taxable income, can gas be a source of non-taxable income? Can food? Can lodging and transportation? So that's why I call it the sanctioned robbery, because they're deciding how to steal legally.
Yeah, and I mean, from my perspective, just to put it simply, I come from a more libertarian way of thinking these days. I think the simple phrase "taxation is theft" is pretty apt, especially confiscatory taxation, like the income tax or property taxes that are also confiscatory. But this is the problem. When we expect more and more from government, then they're going to have to tax us more, because, people, they need to fund whatever programs they're offering. And this is why it always has to go back to the people need to want to take ownership over their own lives. That's the only way we can ever get back to getting rid of these immoral tax systems that we have.
No, yeah, you're right. And with that statement that you made, taxation is theft. Yeah, nowadays taxation is theft. But how this republic was established is that the sovereign states, the individual states, have a right to place direct taxation. That's why the state of Florida is the only state where, it's one of the few states that rejected the 16th Amendment. That's why they don't have a state income tax, because they rejected it, and they rejected that form. They have other forms of taxation because it allows it for the 16th, but not the income tax, the Revenue Act of 1913. But sovereign states have a right, and this is where many individuals, not saying you and not myself, because we know this. It's the Trumpers, it's the Bidenists, it's the Obamanites, the Bushites. You can go back all the way down to FDR or JFK or Lyndon Johnson. They don't realize that states have a right to place direct taxation on its citizens. The states have a right to say, we want to put an income tax, and then we'll pay that share to the federal government, or not, or not do an income tax, or whatever they can do. It is the federal government that has the right to pay indirect taxation in the form of tariffs. See, now people are against tariffs, but that's been, that's been the game plan of how this republic was established. Now, the federal government can, just a little for discussion, the federal government can place direct taxation, but it has to be apportioned by the census. But this is where it gets tricky. How can you apportion by the census when different states are differently? So even logically and principally, it cannot be done because back then Philadelphia was much bigger, was much larger than Alexandria or even Chicago or Springfield, Illinois.
Yeah, and it what always ends up happening is that the party that's viewed, the party that is in power will benefit their friends and take away money from for Republicans in office, the Democrat states will get hurt and the Republican states will get more federal dollars. And when the Democrat is in power, vice versa. And it just creates more of that tribalism that we have. People get more entrenched in their tribe rather than trying to get back to liberty and the first principles, the founding principles of this country.
Yeah, no, you're right. Back in the Bush W years, you had those earmark spending, and then you have Comrade Burns giving pork to Montana, Pennsylvania with Rick Santorum, and even now, and then when Obama got in, Obama approved a congressional plan to give money to Illinois to build a bullet train from Springfield to Chicago. Who's going to benefit? I mean, would Illinois benefit from that bullet train? I mean, I know I've never been to Springfield. I've been to Chicago, but I haven't been to Springfield. But is it really a nice state capital to really benefit? Is there a lot of traffic movement from there?
From my experience, not really. I'll actually, this was a while ago, back when I was in college at Western Illinois University, which is down in Macomb, Illinois, which is kind of midway between Chicago and Springfield. We had the Metro line there that was threatened to get axed because, a lot of students didn't drive to school, but a lot of students came from Chicago to Macomb using the train, but they just didn't have the traffic to keep that line going. And so, what are we we're gonna spend all this money for an even better train system that nobody's gonna use?
Yeah, it only benefits. It only benefited certain members of the Chicago public transit system or the Illinois railway transit system. But the same thing with California. You had Barbara Boxer with Feinstein, and they are now giving money to a bullet train from L.A. to San Francisco, or even L.A. to Nevada. Or the way that the federal government trades votes for other legislation is also it's such a violation of the Constitution to trade votes and trade funding to vote, like, how LBJ did to trade votes for the Civil Rights Act, which was a very good piece of legislation. I know many people may not agree, but we'll get to that when discuss the 14th Amendment later on. But, to trade votes for water funding for Nevada, Arizona, and California, that, people need to understand we are not a central autocracy government, and that's what you and I have always spoken about. We cannot rely on the federal government, and my money cannot go to Nevada. My money, as much as I like Chicago very much, and I like Chicago more than New York, Illinois, Chicago has Illinois as Springfield as their state capital. That's where their funding's got to come, not from Illinois. So Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, come on, talk to your legislators and fund your own projects on your own dime. And the same thing goes. And the same thing goes for Marco Rubio and Rick Scott and Ron Dependent, as I like to call him, because he's governor dependent. And I'll get to that after discussing Florida with potential nominee. But that's just Illinois as well has always been one of them that's been primarily funded by the federal government as well.
Yeah, and I can just say this from experience. I've been a reporter covering local government for now over 16 years. Everything is dependent on the dollars and trying to get more state dollars or federal dollars. I cover village boards, I cover school boards, and they are very dependent on other people to fund their projects, and that it's something that's always kind of disgusted me. But trying to get people to wake up to this, it's a hard hill to climb, because they make they'll make the argument that, well, we're not using tax dollars because they're not using the local tax dollars. And the local people love that because, my property tax bill isn't going to go up, even though they always do go up here in Illinois. But it's just, the dependency is just like huge, on local government. And they're always looking for new ways to get more federal grants, state grants, and, it's just how we get rid of this. I don't know how that happens, but we need to get back to the local government funding their own local projects, state government funding their own projects. We talk about a separation of powers, and, we always think of it in terms of executive branch, judicial branch, and legislative branch. But there's also a separation of powers between the federal, state, and local governments. Mm-hmm. Each one is supposed to be independent of each other. But instead, we've got this monster Leviathan central power in Washington that controls everything.
Oh no, you're right. And two things to that you mentioned, that people don't mind spending other people's money. The only senator that I actually read his book was Barry Goldwater, The Conscience of a Conservative, that I do recommend everybody to read that, because it is so true then and it is true now, because he was discussing the education system in Arizona. And people were saying, well, it's not, they were happy with content to accepting these funds because it wasn't Arizona funds. It was other state funds. And that creates laziness from Arizonans. That creates laziness from other states. They're saying, the federal government's here to help, and all that. And, we're just not going to do anything about it. And that's where I come with Ron Dependent, where, even when he had Hurricane Ian, he was already asking for federal assistance. And I'm like, this is the guy that has criticized Biden, loved Trump, but not now because he's running for president. Now he's taking on Trump, but has criticized Biden. And, he's asking for federal government assistance. If I were Biden, I would say, you know what? You got your state legislature. If Biden was a true constitutionalist, I would have said, you know what? You got your Florida legislature, which is mainly Republican. You got your cabinets, which is mainly Republican. You fix it. You're on your own, buddy boy. And that's how it should be. But this idea of, oh my God, Biden took a long time to show up, or he gives more help to Ukraine, which again, on foreign affairs and defense, it is part of the enumerated powers of the federal government, but the way, because of the Sixth Amendment is drafted, they think they can spend money to Ukraine because, again, Congress is allowed to do that. But, we shouldn't have that type of crying, oh, thank God that Trump is here and not Biden, or where's Biden, or where's Trump? Trumpism has not helped the sovereign states of the American Republic. Trumpism has really decreased it more into dependency. Now, Trump only likes to help the white people of East Palestine, which again, I just want to show one other thing is that he went to East Palestine, Ohio, not the Middle East. So he was happy to go there. But it's just, Trumpism has not helped. Republicanism has not helped. Democrats has not helped. It really hasn't.
Yeah, and just I could go many different ways because there's so much coming out that is just kind of disgusts me that kind of what's happening with conservatives who I came from the conservative side. I am somebody with traditional values. I always called myself a conservative growing up, and, I've kind of gotten away from that because I don't know what conservatives believe anymore. just especially after the Trump experiment, which is still ongoing since he's running for president again. I don't get how anybody can support this guy. But Trump recently came out and talked about he wants to develop these, what he calls freedom cities. And he wants to develop flying cars and just, like just science fiction stuff he's proposing in his second term if he gets reelected. And I'm just sitting here thinking, well, where in the Constitution does it give the federal government power to create cities? It doesn't.
No.
I mean, why do we want the federal government to develop cities where you're going to be under federal control if you live there? And the conservatives cheer this on. I don't get it.
No, I don't get why a lot of Republicans are cheering on a first term loser. I mean, here's a man like Gerald Ford that was not even elected vice president, not elected president, and yet there were some in 1980 that wanted him to run for re-election. I'm like, are you kidding? I mean, and then they got some new blood, which was Ronald Reagan, which again, Ronald Reagan, I have my doubts about him because, he came in again, on another note, but, now that you mentioned that he's proposing to build freedom cities, what does that mean? Proposing, I mean, and freedom and efficient cars. Since when is the federal government in line to be an automotive industry? I mean, are they trying to be like Lada or Yugo? Do they want to build a Yugo plant or something? I mean, it's just asinine that these individuals that love Trump and favor Trump. I mean, where are they? Are these cars only for white privileged or just for, because that's mainly their support group, or anybody who is a Trumper, regardless of their race or color. It's asinine to think that one thing. Also with Trump and Obama, Obama took a lot of heat when Obama said, "I got a pen and I got a phone and I can do what I do." And then Trump comes in and says, "Only I can fix it." Why are we relying on these two jackasses? Why are we relying on one person? That's why we got rid of the monarchy, to get rid of that one person.
Yeah. Yeah, and that just to, shift topics here on that same notion there, on gun control. Donald Trump was the first president to ever use executive order for gun control, to ban bump stocks. And, I remember talking to, and I'll be completely honest, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I was not a big fan. It was simply an anti-Hillary vote.
We'll not hold it against you. We'll not hold it against you.
Yeah, I repent of that sin. No. But honestly, I throughout Trump's presidency, long before 2020 and COVID and everything that came of that, I was so done with Donald Trump then. But for all 4 years, this massive spender, this guy who just, bragged about big government program after big government program that he wanted to implement. And I was always talking to conservatives, and I was trying to play nice. I'm like, look, this is our guy. I voted for him. We need to hold him accountable. But no, they bowed and worshiped the guy. And, he, like I said, he was the first president to ever use executive order for gun control. And, I remember trying to talk to conservatives. Well, who has a bump stock? That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He doesn't have authority to ban bump stocks. And now we've got Joe Biden, who's now used executive orders twice for gun control. So Donald Trump set the precedent.
Well,
and,
go ahead.
The conservatives just, they can't understand this. They can't understand all the ways that Donald Trump massively screwed us.
No, you're right. And not only that he used on the issue of, before I get to the issue of executive orders, which I think people misunderstand the power of executive orders, but to recall, Trump actually said, let's take them the guns and take them to trial. I'm going, what? I mean, did he just offer protective custody to remove the guns and then take them to court? It's actually take them to court and decide if he's worthy of that gun. He's disavowing the Fourth and the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment of due process. So that's something that, this new ideology is really making a mockery of our American Republic with this individual where, he's just the same thing as Biden. Now, on the issue of executive orders, the executive orders were not really meant to be legislation. I'll give you the perfect example of executive order, Seth. The perfect example of executive order is when Congress didn't want to vote on John Bolton's nomination to ambassador to the UN, and so in recess, George W. Bush signed an executive order to install him as ambassador to the UN. Executive orders are only for the executive branch. It's not a legislation. It's not anything else, but to favor the executive branch.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. So that was it. And then, when you get to executive orders, we'll further discuss on immigration. Oh, you better believe it. I'm more than ticked off on immigration, on what Trumpism has done, because, but we'll get to that on the next segment on immigration, because I strongly believe that, whether you're in California or Nevada, it is up to that state to control their borders. That border belongs to that state. It's not a federal government property. So if California wants to give them citizenship, that's fine. And wants to, if they commit a crime, and if they commit a crime in California, well, they'll be held accountable in California. If they move to Nevada or Idaho or Illinois, then they're responsible give them their due process in that state itself, because they're under the territory of Arizona or whatever. So, but yeah, we'll get to immigration, because that also has ruined the whole spectrum on the Republic's view and again with Trumpism. But so that was, but Trumpism has really failed it. But what were you about to say, Seth?
Just on, like the immigration thing, I just, I think about it, and, we always have a lot of, especially conservatives who blame a lot of the problems on immigrants. And the problem isn't on the immigrants. The problem is on the welfare state, the entitlement state. And there are some immigrants coming over who want to get on the government dole, because we provide it. But I have just as much of a problem with American citizens on welfare as I do with illegal immigrants on welfare. Mm-hmm. I am opposed to welfare. That's what I'm opposed to. I'm not opposed to the immigrants.
Oh, no, I'm not either. I'm not. I'm not either. I mean, they should be welcome here, but it should be the sovereign states to decide how do they become residents, how they become citizens. Because again, the Constitution says that we are citizens of this country, we're natural born or naturalized. But I still think that states should be able to handle that, not the federal government. And for Trump to say what I'm doing is no different than FDR when he was proposing a Muslim ban and comparing FDR's to the Japanese American ban, how can people listen to this man? Quoting FDR? Give me a break.
Yes, yeah, and that's not just on that period. FDR, the early 1900s. Donald Trump was just out recently saying that he wants to save our great Social Security system. And I'm sitting here like, what? Our great Social Security system? You mean that Ponzi scheme, that socialist Ponzi scheme? And again, conservatives cheer for that.
Yeah. I mean, or when the State of the Union, and here's the state of dependency that we're in. When the State of the Union, Biden says that, well, there are some Republicans that wants to get rid of Medicare and Social Security, and you see the loon from Georgia, Marjorie Greene, and you see Lauren Boebert from Colorado booing. I go, wait a minute. I mean, this is a good thing that he's saying that, we want to get rid of Social Security. We want to get rid of Medicare because those programs are so unconstitutional. They're cheering for unconstitutionality.
Yeah. That's the thing. I wrote about that, a couple weeks ago when that happened, and I didn't watch any of the State of the Union. I'm kind of I try not to watch the political theater because it's just that it's theater. But I saw the headlines about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I had to click and watch that portion, and I'm like, these Republicans are so apoplectic, so offended that they're accused of wanting to get rid of a socialist Ponzi scheme system that should have never been created. They're offended by the idea that they would want to get rid of socialism, even though they're the ones who always preach the Democrats are trying to make us a socialist nation. Well, we're so far past socialism, folks.
We have it in the Constitution. We have a 16th Amendment that says that Congress has a right to take away our income. If that's not socialism, I don't know what is. So America is a socialist nation. And we need to wake people up about that.
Yeah, and I'll go even further. It's not even socialism. It's even past socialism. We are effectively a fascist system.
Yeah.
Because, like we were talking about with Donald Trump and the freedom cities and wanting to create cars, that is textbook fascism. That's, the government and the business sector aligned. That's the government and big corporations are attached at the hips. Mm-hmm. That is fascism.
Yeah, that's fascism, creating a Mercedes-Benz for the rich and Volkswagen for the poor. You'll get you a little car, but it won't be as good. Yeah, that's straight totalitarianism. That's straight government control. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and it's it's both parties. It's we've been dealing with this for so long. I'm always in this struggle of, I loathe what Donald Trump has done to conservatives, but I also saw back to what, when I was a George W. Bush supporter, what I supported and I should have never supported. Mm-hmm. But it's Democrat and Republican. It's been going on for decades. And, it gets reinforced by the tribalism. We've got just warring factions on the left. I don't think there is a right in America anymore. I think the so-called right wing is just a different tribe on the left. They're all arguing for more government. They're mm-hmm. arguing for their tribe to be in power, their tribe to be in control. And it's people need to start thinking for themselves and getting off of their party plantation. Yeah. Republicans will talk a lot about how, black Americans are on the Democrat plantation. Well, I agree to an extent. I think the Democrats are a plantation. I think the Republicans are too. You need to wake up. Both parties are a plantation and they control you. Stop letting them control you.
Yeah, you're right. And, you're absolutely right on that one. They're both they're both like a plantation home, and they just want to keep you and feed you and keep you there, and they'll do, they'll support anything to keep that same government control and all that. So, but I'm going to leave it with that note, and we'll be back in more discussion about this, because this is an ongoing thing, whether it's immigration or commerce or just plain government spending on welfare and Social Security and the Ponzi scheme. We'll be back, and Seth, it's great to have you, and let's keep it strong, because we need voices like you and I to really bring it out there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, definitely. Just need to get back to people thinking for themselves. Yes. And becoming independent of the system, and seeing how the system has been totally perverted.
Yes, and not relying on the central autocracy that we relied. And then one last note. In my political science class at Thomas University, my political science professor, I took a class of state local government, and she once said, well, I know that we have a state government in Tallahassee and Atlanta and so on, but all directives come from Washington, D.C. And I raised my hand and I said, so what's the point of this class? So why do we have this class if this is not existent and all policy comes from D.C.? Of course, she didn't like me, but she really gave me that hate to get me out of there. But it is that way of thinking that, oh yeah, we have a state government in Tallahassee, we have this in Springfield and Helena, Montana, and wherever, but all policy comes from D.C. No, it's not. It shouldn't. It really does not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Seth, it's a pleasure. This is our first segment. We'll be back with more. I hope you tune in. And you have yourself a great night, Seth, in Illinois.
Yep, and you as well.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks again, everybody.
Yeah.